I always thought betrayal would come from strangers, not from the people I loved most. At 55, after decades of sacrificing my dreams for my family, I discovered a truth that shattered everything I believed in. My husband, who I stood by for 30 years, had been having an affair with his 29-year-old assistant for 3 years. But that wasn't the worst part. My own children knew. They knew. And they helped him hide it. When I confronted them, they didn't apologize. They didn't show an ounce of regret. Instead, they told me I should be grateful for the life their father's business provided. They said I was too old to stir up drama, that I should focus on being a good grandmother and stay quiet. In that moment, they erased every sacrifice I had ever made. They saw me as nothing more than a burden, a forgotten shadow in their perfect lives. What they didn't know was that I held the one secret that could bring their entire world crashing down, and I wasn't afraid to use it. What would you do if your own family betrayed you? Stay silent or take back control. Let me tell you how I reminded them exactly who I am. Subscribe to Outlaw Alley and listen to the full story, because this is one revenge they never saw coming. I wasn't always the woman with a plan. For most of my life, I played the role everyone expected of me. I was Patricia Reynolds' wife of Robert Reynolds, a respected engineer in Denver, Colorado, mother of 3. The supportive wife who smiled at company parties and raised the kids while her husband built his career. That was the image everyone saw, but behind that image was a woman slowly fading into the background. When Robert and I got married in our 20s, I believed in us. I believed in the partnership we promised each other. But as the years passed, that partnership felt more like a one-way street. Robert's career always came first. His late nights at the office, his business trips, his ambitions. And me, I became the anchor at home, steady, reliable, invisible. But I wasn't bitter. At least, not at first. While raising our kids, I realized something important. If I didn't invest in myself, no one else would. So late at night, after the kids were asleep and Robert was still at the office, I opened my laptop. I enrolled in online courses, business management, accounting, finance. It wasn't glamorous and no one knew, but it was mine. Then when my grandmother passed away, she left me something unexpected, an inheritance. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to plant a seed. I used that money to make quiet investments, stock small ventures, nothing risky but smart. And over time, I built a safety net no one knew existed. 15 years ago, that safety net became a lifeline. Robert's company, Reynolds Engineering, hit a crisis. Bad contracts, market shifts. Suddenly, the business he poured his life into was days away from bankruptcy. I watched him spiral, prideful, desperate, refusing help. That's when I made a decision. I wasn't going to let my family lose everything because of his ego. Through a holding company I quietly established, I purchased Reynolds Engineering. No one knew the buyer's identity, not even Robert. I hired a trusted attorney to act as the face of the operation. From that point on, every major decision went through me. I studied the company's weaknesses, restructured departments, renegotiated contracts. Robert thought he had pulled off a miracle turnaround. He stood in front of employees taking credit for saving the company, and I let him. Because at the time I believed protecting his pride and keeping our family stable was worth more than recognition. For 15 years, I was the silent owner of Reynolds Engineering. I watched my husband bask in praise. I watched my children grow up believing their father was a genius businessman. And I told myself it didn't matter that harmony was more important than the truth, but harmony built on lies doesn't last forever. Looking back, I realize I should have seen the signs sooner. The way Robert dismissed my opinions at dinner parties, how my children mirrored his attitude, seeing me as just mom, the woman who kept the house running but didn't understand real business. They never asked about my interests, never wondered how we stayed afloat during the company's darkest days. I had become invisible in my own home. Yet I stayed silent because that's what was expected, because I thought loyalty meant enduring being overlooked. I never imagined that the people I sacrificed everything for would one day turn around and betray me without hesitation. But when the truth finally surfaced, I wasn't the powerless woman they assumed I was. I had spent years preparing for a moment I didn't even know was coming, and when it did, I was ready. It started with little things. The way Robert guarded his phone, the sudden business trips that didn't add up, the cologne I didn't recognize lingering on his shirts. After 30 years of marriage, you learn to sense when something isn't right, but I wanted to believe I was just being paranoid. One afternoon, I was cleaning the living room when his phone buzzed on the table. He was in the shower. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. There it was, a message from Emily, his assistant. Too familiar, too intimate. My heart pounded as I scrolled through weeks of messages, dinner reservations, weekend getaways disguised as conferences. Photos. I wish I could erase from my mind 3 years. He had been lying to my face for 3 years. I felt sick. But the real blow came later that evening. I sat my children down, Michael, Sarah, and David. All adults now building their own lives. I thought they'd be outraged. I thought they'd stand by me. But when I told them about their father's affair, they didn't look surprised. Michael sighed and exchanged glances with his siblings. Sarah avoided my eyes. David simply said, "Mom, we've known for a while." I couldn't breathe. They knew, and they said nothing. Why? I whispered, my voice shaking. Why would you cover for him? Michael spoke first. Because Dad's reputation is important. The company our family name depends on him. Sarah chimed in. We didn't want to upset you. You've always been emotional about these things. Emotional. I stared at them, realizing they didn't see me as a person with feelings, just a fragile figure to be managed. David added the final insult. Look, Mom, at your age. Does it really matter? You have a comfortable life Dad provides for all of us. Just let it go. Let it go. Decades of loyalty, sacrifice, and silence dismissed with 3 words. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of betrayal. Not just from Robert, but from the very children I had devoted my life to. That night, I barely slept. I replayed every conversation, every family gathering where they smiled in my face, knowing the truth. By morning, something inside me snapped. Not in anger, but in clarity. They thought I was powerless. They thought I was too old, too dependent, too naive to do anything but accept their lies. What they didn't realize was that I held the keys to everything they valued. The business, the money, the legacy they thought belonged to Robert. At breakfast, Robert acted like nothing had happened. He kissed my cheek, grabbed his briefcase, and walked out the door off to his company. I watched him leave calm and composed, because now I wasn't just his wife, I was the owner of his world. And I was done playing the role they assigned me. I picked up the phone and called my attorney. It was time to remind them who I really was. Not the forgotten housewife, not the aging grandmother they could sideline. I was Patricia Reynolds, the woman who saved their futures 15 years ago, and the woman who could take it all away. That evening I called for a family dinner, one last chance for them, not to apologize. I knew better than to expect that, but to see if there was even a shred of respect left in them. We sat around the same table where I had served countless meals over the years, the place where birthdays were celebrated, where school achievements were praised, where I believed we were a family. I looked at Robert, then at my children, each of them avoiding my gaze, pretending this was just another casual gathering. I cleared my throat, my hands steady. I know everything, I said, quietly. Robert leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. Patricia, we've already been through this. There's no need to make a scene. And a scene. I repeated, my voice calm. You've been unfaithful for 3 years, and our children have been complicit. I think that deserves more than brushing it under the rug. Sarah rolled her eyes. Mom, we told you it's not worth destroying the family over this. Michael chimed in, his tone patronizing. You've had a good life. Mom-Dad's success has provided everything you could ever need. Why throw it all away over emotions? I felt David's words coming before he even opened his mouth. At your age, Mom, you should focus on being a grandmother, not stirring up drama. There it was, the final confirmation that they didn't see me, not really, not as a woman, Not as a partner, not even as a mother who deserved honesty, just a fixture in the background of their lives. I nodded slowly, absorbing every word. I think part of them expected me to cry, to beg for reassurance or pretend nothing happened, but instead I smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. "Thank you," I said softly. Robert frowned. "For what?" "For showing me exactly where I stand." I stood up, collected the dishes, and walked into the kitchen like the dutiful wife they thought I was, but inside I felt lighter than I had in years, because I knew this was it. There was no going back. The woman they thought they could dismiss had disappeared the moment they spoke those words. I wasn't going to fight for their respect anymore. I was going to take back what was mine and leave them to face the consequences. That night after they left, I finalized everything with my attorney. The sale contract was ready. The buyer, Robert's biggest competitor, was eager to close the deal. All that was left was my signature. As I held the pen, I thought about the years I spent sacrificing, staying silent, believing that keeping the family together was worth losing pieces of myself. But betrayal has a way of clearing your vision. I signed the papers without hesitation, and with that stroke of a pen, I dismantled the world they thought was untouchable. The next morning, I watched Robert leave for work like he did every day, oblivious to the storm about to hit. It wasn't revenge driven by rage. It was justice. Long overdue. For the first time in decades, I felt powerful, not because I was taking something away from them, but because I was finally choosing me. There was no more waiting for recognition, no more hoping they'd see my worth. They would learn it the hard way, and when they did, I'd be far beyond their reach. By sunrise, everything was in motion. I wasn't acting out of impulse. This plan had been years in the making, even if I didn't realize it. The holding company I created 15 years ago had served its purpose, well shielding my identity while I controlled every major decision at Reynolds Engineering. Now it would serve me one last time. My attorney, Mr. Caldwell, had been waiting for my call. He was one of the few people who truly understood my role not as Robert's wife, but as the silent architect behind his so-called success. "The contracts are ready, Mrs. Reynolds," he said. "All we need is your final authorization." I gave it without hesitation. The sale of Reynolds Engineering to our competitor would be announced by noon. By then, Robert would already be sitting in his office, completely unaware that his title as CEO was about to become meaningless. I spent the morning tying up loose ends. I transferred my share of the $12 million sale into accounts Robert couldn't touch, accounts I had opened years ago in my name. Only I instructed Mr. Caldwell to file the divorce papers that afternoon. Every detail was precise. There would be no arguments, no negotiations. Robert wouldn't have time to react before it was all finalized at exactly 11:45 a.m. I received the call I had been waiting for. "Patricia, what the hell is going on?" Robert's voice was frantic, nothing like the calm, arrogant tone he usually carried. "I just walked into the office and there are strangers everywhere, taking inventory, changing locks. They're saying the company's been sold. My company." I let a brief silence hang in the air before answering. "It's not your company, Robert," I said evenly. "It never was." There was a pause on his end, pure confusion turning into something darker. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. "Who did this?" I did. Another silence, this one heavier. "For the past 15 years, I've owned Reynolds Engineering." I continued, my voice steady. "I bought it when you were too proud to ask for help. I saved it. And I let you take the credit." His breath caught. "You're lying." "No. Robert, I just stopped pretending I could hear the chaos in the background. Voices, doors, closing his world, unraveling in real time. I've sold the company for $12 million. I added, "The deal closed this morning. It's done. You can't do this," he shouted, panic rising. "This is my legacy, my life's work." I almost laughed, but there was no joy in it. "It was my work that kept you afloat. You were just too blind to see it." Before he could respond, I delivered the final blow. "I've also filed for divorce. The papers should be arriving shortly. Don't bother trying to contest it. You won't find a single asset in your name that I didn't allow." For the first time in years, Robert was speechless, and I felt free. I ended the call without another word. There was nothing left to say. By the end of the day, the news had spread. Reynolds Engineering was under new ownership, and Robert Reynolds was out, without severance, without status, without control. As for my children, it didn't take long for them to realize something was wrong. Michael called, first demanding answers. "Mom, what's going on? Dad just called, he's saying you sold the company. That can't be true." "Oh, it's true," I replied calmly. "And before you ask, no, you're not getting a share of the proceeds." Sarah tried a softer approach, pretending to care. "Mom, we didn't know you were involved in the business." "Why didn't you ever tell us?" I smiled to myself. "Because none of you ever thought to ask David." Always the blunt one accused me outright. "You're ruining this family out of spite." "No, David," I said quietly. "I'm saving myself from a family that never respected me." That night I packed my bags, not out of sadness, but with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in decades. I wasn't running away. I was stepping into the life I had built in silence, and now I was going to live it out loud. The next few days were a whirlwind, but not for me. For Robert and the children, it was as if the ground beneath them had collapsed overnight. Robert tried everything to regain control. He called former colleagues, tried to reach out to investors desperate to salvage his reputation, but it was too late. Without the company, he was just a man with a title that no longer meant anything. The new owners made it clear there was no place for him in their plans. They had admired Patricia Reynolds' business acumen, not Robert's inflated ego. Funny how no one ever suspected the quiet wife behind the scenes was the real force keeping things afloat. As for my children, reality hit them just as hard. They had grown used to the privileges that came with being part of the successful Reynolds family. But now, the invitations stopped coming. The doors that once opened easily were suddenly closed. Michael, who had built his career on the assumption of inheriting the company one day, was left adrift. Sarah, who flaunted the family name in social circles, found herself ignored. David, who never worked a day in his life, finally realized that entitlement doesn't pay the bills. They called, they texted. They even showed up at my old house, confused, angry, demanding explanations. But I was no longer there. By the time they realized the extent of what had happened, I was already settling into my new home, a beautiful beachfront property in California. The sound of waves replaced the constant hum of expectations. For the first time in my life, I woke up without feeling invisible. I spent my mornings walking along the shore, breathing in freedom, and my afternoons building something that truly mattered, my foundation. I named it the Second Chance Initiative, a program dedicated to supporting women over 40 who wanted to return to education, start businesses, or reclaim the dreams they had set aside for others. Every dollar I invested into that foundation felt like a piece of my soul being restored. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. Weeks later, Robert finally tracked me down. Not in person, he wouldn't dare, but through a carefully worded email. It was filled with feigned concern and veiled accusations. He wrote about how I had acted irrationally, how I had destroyed the family legacy. He even had the audacity to suggest we could work things out if I returned some of the money I didn't bother replying. Some silences speak louder than words. My children followed shortly after, each reaching out in their own way. Michael tried to reason with me, framing his plea as keeping the family united. Sarah sent messages dripping with guilt trips, reminding me of holidays and memories we shared. David simply asked for money as always. But I wasn't the same woman they thought they knew. I wasn't going to be manipulated by nostalgia or obligations. Eventually, they realized that if they wanted a relationship with me, it would be on my terms, not theirs, and those terms were simple: respect, honesty, and the acknowledgement that I was more than the role they had assigned me. Months passed, and slowly the anger in their voices faded. Michael visited me first, not to ask for anything, but to truly talk. For the first time, he asked about me, about how I managed to build a business empire in silence. Sarah followed, humbled by how quickly status can vanish when built on illusions. David, well, he took longer, but even he came around when he saw that I wasn't just a source of comfort or cash, I was a person with boundaries. As for Robert, he remained a relic of his own downfall, bitter and alone, clinging to a past that no longer existed. And me, I stood taller than ever, not because I tore them down, but because I finally chose to stand for myself. The fallout wasn't just theirs to face, it was my liberation. Looking back now, I don't regret a single decision I made. For too long, I believed that being a good wife and mother meant staying silent, sacrificing my identity for the sake of family harmony. But silence doesn't earn respect. It only teaches people how to ignore you. When Robert and my children betrayed me, it wasn't just about infidelity or lies. It was about years of being unseen, unheard, underestimated. They thought I was weak because I chose peace over pride. What they didn't understand was that true strength isn't loud, it's patient. It's knowing exactly when to act and having the courage to do it when the time comes. I didn't destroy my family. I revealed who they really were, and in doing so, I reclaimed who I was today. My life is no longer defined by titles like wife or mother. I am Patricia Reynolds, founder, investor, and advocate for women who, like me, were told their time had passed. The women I meet through my foundation inspire me every day. They remind me that it's never too late to rewrite your story. That age is not a cage. It's experience, wisdom, and power waiting to be claimed. As for my children, we're rebuilding, slowly. But this time they see me clearly. Not as the woman who stood behind their father, but as the woman who stood on her own. And that's all I ever wanted, to be seen, to be respected, to live life on my terms. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: never let anyone, no matter how close, convince you that your worth expires with age or silence. Invest in yourself even when no one's watching, especially when no one's watching. Because one day when the people around you show their true colors, you'll be ready not to survive, but to rise.